She was the CEO of a cutting-edge tech company, a visionary who had built a name for herself through resilience and ingenuity. Her presence on this flight was unassuming. She didn't want to draw attention. She avoided any situation where her position might become known, preferring to navigate the world without the weight of assumptions that often accompanied it. She gazed out the window, the bright skyline of New York gradually fading into the horizon. Her mind wandered to the upcoming board meeting and the pivotal decisions she had to make about her company's next steps. Despite the constant demands of her career, Jessica was determined to remain present for Mia, to show her that a woman could be both a dedicated mother and a powerful force in the business world. But this flight, this quiet, routine journey, was about to take a sharp turn, one that would force Jessica to confront an ugliness she had hoped she'd left behind long ago. As Jessica adjusted her daughter's seatbelt, the flight attendant, Laura Bennett, strode down the aisle. Laura's sharp, crisp uniform commanded attention, and the way she moved, almost arrogantly, told anyone paying attention that she held a certain level of self-importance. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back tightly into a bun, the edges of her uniform neat, almost sterile. She had worked on the planes for years, and she believed her role as a first-class flight attendant afforded her a kind of unspoken power. When Laura reached Jessica's row, she paused for a moment, her eyes flicking over the young girl in Jessica's lap. Her expression hardened, just slightly, but enough for Jessica to notice. Laura's gaze lingered, and Jessica could almost feel the judgment simmering in the air. Mia's soft voice interrupted the silence. "Mommy, I'm hungry," she said, her small hands tugging at Jessica's sleeve. Jessica, always prepared, reached into the diaper bag beside her and pulled out a small snack pack. Before Jessica could hand it to Mia, Laura spoke, her tone tinged with annoyance. "Ma'am," she said, her voice cold, "I must ask that you quiet your child. We can't have disturbances in first class." Jessica's eyebrow quirked in surprise. It wasn't the first time Mia had gotten a little loud on a flight, but she didn't expect a reprimand, especially not in such a curt manner. She glanced at Laura, then at the other passengers, who were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension building. But Jessica's reaction was measured. She smiled politely, nodding, and reassured her daughter in a calm voice. "It's okay, sweetie. We're almost there." Mia gave her mother a confused look, but quieted down, her tiny face pressing against Jessica's shoulder. It was at that moment that Jessica realized something was off. The coldness in Laura's voice was more than just a standard correction. It was laced with something else. Was it disdain? Contempt? Jessica couldn't be sure, but the feeling of discomfort gnawed at her. Laura's eyes narrowed as she watched Mia settle down. "Please remember, this is a first-class cabin," Laura continued, her words clipped, her gaze now focused solely on Jessica. "Not everyone is suited for this level of service." The words hung in the air, cutting through the quiet hum of the cabin. Jessica's stomach tightened, the tone of Laura's voice sending an uncomfortable shiver down her spine. For a moment she thought she might have misheard, but the sneer that tugged at the corner of Laura's mouth confirmed it. Jessica's mind raced. What had she done to provoke this? She had been nothing but polite, nothing but courteous. The words were subtle, but the implications were clear. Laura, with her pristine uniform and air of superiority, had made an assumption about her, about them. What happened next would forever change the course of their flight. Laura stood still for a moment, her gaze piercing through Jessica with an intensity that felt far too personal. Then, without warning, she leaned in, a malicious glint flashing in her eyes. "You don't belong here," she spat, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with venom. "You're not the type." Jessica's heart skipped a beat, but she remained composed. She couldn't let this woman see how deeply her words had stung. Laura had crossed a line, and Jessica could feel the walls of first class closing in around her. Mia, oblivious to the tension, reached for her snack pack, her tiny hands fumbling as she opened it. It was at this exact moment that the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Marcus Harris, CEO of Horizon Airlines. I would like to address a situation currently unfolding in our first-class cabin. The woman you are speaking to is my wife." The words hung in the air, reverberating across the cabin as the passengers froze. Their attention snapped toward the speakers overhead. The smug look on Laura's face faltered, replaced by confusion and panic. She turned sharply, her gaze sweeping across the cabin as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape from the truth. The room was silent. Jessica, her calm exterior unwavering, locked eyes with Laura. She knew that this was far from over and that the game had just changed. The hum of the airplane engines felt distant now, as if the world had momentarily paused in the wake of Marcus Harris's announcement. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, the once chilly air now thick with the weight of unspoken words. Every eye was on Jessica, and the subtle tension she'd felt moments ago had now transformed into something more palpable, something impossible to ignore. Laura Bennett stood frozen in the aisle, her eyes wide with disbelief as the passengers around her murmured, exchanging glances, their shock evident. Some of them were already reaching for their phones, recording the exchange that had just taken place. The murmurs spread quickly through the cabin, creating a buzz of energy that Jessica had not anticipated. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the ripple of realization spreading through the passengers, making it all the more difficult to remain calm. Jessica had always prided herself on her ability to navigate situations like this with grace and poise, but she was no stranger to how people with power could sometimes use it to belittle those they deemed beneath them. She had faced her share of microaggressions in her career, often subtle, sometimes not so much. But this was different. This was brazen, and it was happening right here, in front of a plane full of people. Despite the deep sting of Laura's words, Jessica didn't allow herself to show the hurt. Instead, she turned her attention to Mia, who was now snuggling into her lap, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Jessica's heart swelled with love for her daughter, and in that moment, she drew strength from her. Mia was her anchor, and nothing would take that away. Laura, meanwhile, seemed to snap back to reality. She straightened her uniform, trying to regain her composure. But it was clear she was floundering. The smug confidence that had once marked her presence in the cabin had evaporated, leaving behind a nervous, twitchy energy. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. "Claire Ramsey, you are finished," Marcus's voice boomed through the intercom again, this time more forceful, more definitive. "Report to the galley immediately." The words hit like a thunderclap, and it was clear to everyone that Marcus wasn't making idle threats. The passengers who had been whispering moments earlier now fell silent, waiting for the next move. Laura, her face flushed a deep shade of crimson, looked around the cabin as if searching for some sign that this was all some kind of mistake. But there was no mistake. Jessica wasn't just anyone. She was Marcus Harris's wife, and she was no longer the target of ridicule. Laura's mouth twitched, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "That's ridiculous," she muttered, trying to dismiss the gravity of the situation with a wave of her hand. "This is just a prank. There's no way—" But her words trailed off as the captain's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Claire Ramsey, this is Captain Holloway. That was Marcus Harris's wife you just slapped. Report to the galley immediately." At that, the entire cabin seemed to collectively hold its breath. The confusion on Laura's face morphed into panic, but her instinct was to downplay the situation. She turned her back on Jessica, striding toward the galley, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, as if she could outrun the consequences. But the damage had already been done. The passengers, some still holding their phones, had witnessed it all. Jessica's humiliation, Laura's outburst, and now the swift, decisive action that Marcus had taken. It was clear to them that this was no longer about a simple flight dispute. This was a reckoning. The moment Laura entered the galley, the door swung closed behind her, and the cabin erupted into whispers. Some passengers exchanged nods of approval, others simply stared, unsure of what to say or do. Jessica remained seated, her posture straight and composed, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. She knew that while the first battle had been won, the war was far from over. Mia tugged at Jessica's sleeve. "Mommy, is everything okay?" Her voice was small, full of innocence, and it broke Jessica's resolve for a brief moment. Jessica bent down, her lips pressing against Mia's forehead in a soft kiss. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a little bump in the road. We're okay." The reassurance was for Mia, but also herself. In that moment, Jessica realized something. This wasn't just about a flight attendant's rude behavior. It wasn't just about a slap. This was about something bigger, something deeper that had been brewing beneath the surface for far too long. Jessica wasn't just defending herself or her daughter. She was standing up against something that needed to be confronted, something that had gone unchecked for far too long. As the plane continued its course toward Los Angeles, the tension in the air didn't dissipate. The passengers had witnessed a woman, a mother, being humiliated by a flight attendant, only to have that same flight attendant's world come crashing down in an instant. There was a certain justice in it, one that made Jessica's resolve even stronger. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this. Her story was far from over, and Marcus's voice, that powerful declaration over the intercom, had just marked the beginning of a new chapter. She looked out the window, watching as the sun began to set, casting golden light over the clouds below. There was a sense of finality in that moment, a feeling that whatever came next, she would face it head on. Because this wasn't just about her, it was about proving that everyone, no matter their background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And Jessica Taylor wasn't about to let anyone forget that. The silence that followed Marcus's announcement felt thick, like the calm before a storm. The engines hummed steadily, but inside the cabin, the tension was palpable. Jessica remained seated, her back straight, her hand resting gently on Mia's small shoulder as she tried to reassure her daughter with a soft smile. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, she didn't want Mia to feel the weight of it. This was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't going to break her. Minutes ticked by slowly, the uneasy stillness in the air punctuated only by the occasional murmur of passengers whispering to one another. The cabin, once buzzing with conversation and light chatter, now seemed frozen in time. Eyes flicked between Jessica and the galley, where Laura had disappeared moments ago, her composure shattered by the events that had unfolded. The sense of justice that Jessica felt, knowing that Marcus's voice had brought the truth to light, was bittersweet. She had been humiliated, but now Laura's carefully constructed facade of power had crumbled, revealing her true colors. As the minutes passed, the anticipation grew. The question on everyone's mind was clear. What would happen next? Jessica's phone buzzed softly, interrupting the stillness. It was a message from her assistant, Evelyn, back at the office. She glanced down at the screen, reading the brief update. The board meeting is rescheduled for tomorrow. Everything is set for the merger. Let me know if you need anything. The mundane nature of the message, in contrast to what was happening around her, was almost surreal. Jessica quickly typed back a short reply, telling Evelyn everything was fine for now, though her mind was elsewhere. "Mommy," Mia whispered, her voice small. "Are we going to be okay?" Jessica's heart ached as she looked down at her daughter's innocent face. She tucked a stray lock of Mia's hair behind her ear and nodded with a smile that, though strained, was as comforting as she could muster. "We're going to be just fine, sweetheart. Just fine." Mia's eyes, wide with curiosity and concern, searched her mother's face for any hint of distress, but all she saw was calm assurance. It was a skill Jessica had perfected over the years, the ability to remain composed, to project strength even when she didn't feel it herself. But beneath the surface, Jessica's mind was racing, her thoughts spinning in a million directions. The flight attendant's slap had been more than just an isolated incident. It had exposed the layers of bias that existed in the world around her. Bias that she had long known existed, but had somehow hoped would remain hidden. This wasn't just about a flight attendant's rude behavior. This was about something much larger, something systemic. The faint murmur of conversation began to rise again as the door to the galley swung open. Laura emerged, her face pale, her movements stiff and mechanical as she walked down the aisle. The arrogance that had once marked her steps had disappeared, replaced by a kind of nervous energy that only further accentuated her guilt. As she passed Jessica's seat, her eyes briefly met Jessica's, and for a fleeting moment, Jessica could see the flicker of fear in her gaze, a fear that hadn't been there before. But Laura didn't apologize. She didn't even attempt to explain her actions. Instead, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact as she made her way toward the back of the plane. Her exit was quick and efficient, but it didn't escape the notice of the passengers who had been silently observing the scene. Jessica felt the weight of their gazes, but she didn't allow herself to be rattled. Not now. not after everything she had been through. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came through the intercom again, this time calmer, more resolute. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've resolved the situation, and I'd like to assure you that Horizon Airlines takes matters like this very seriously. I ask that we all continue to respect one another and enjoy the rest of our flight. The announcement, though intended to calm the passengers, felt like an afterthought, almost hollow. Jessica knew that what had just transpired wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a few kind words. The damage had been done, and it had exposed something much deeper than just one flight attendant's misplaced authority. As the captain's voice faded, Jessica felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find one of the passengers, an older man in a gray suit standing beside her seat. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were filled with sincerity. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice low but firm, "that I saw what happened. And I have to tell you, what she did was wrong. I don't care who you are or where you come from. No one deserves to be treated like that." Jessica blinked in surprise, caught off guard by the man's words. She had expected sympathy, maybe even a few apologetic glances, but this was different. This was validation. She gave him a small nod, grateful for the unexpected support. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "It means more than you know." The man gave her a brief nod before he turned and returned to his seat. Jessica exhaled slowly, her hand tightening around Mia's small fingers. It was moments like these, small, quiet acts of solidarity, that made her believe, deep down, that the world could change. It might not be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be fast, but it could change. She was proof of that. Her journey had been one of constant pushback, but with every challenge, she had risen higher, just as she would do now. Mia shifted in her seat, her small voice pulling Jessica from her thoughts. "Are we going to see Daddy soon?" Jessica smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection. "Yes, sweetie. We'll see Daddy soon." As the plane continued its steady course toward Los Angeles, Jessica sat back, allowing herself a rare moment of peace. She knew that what had just happened was only the beginning. The true battle was yet to come, and when it did, she would face it head-on, with the same quiet strength that had gotten her this far. She wasn't just a mother. She wasn't just a CEO. She was someone who refused to be silenced. And no matter what happened next, she would make sure that her story, our story, was heard. The plane's descent toward Los Angeles was slow, but every second felt like an eternity. Jessica remained in her seat, her hands gently cradling Mia, who had fallen asleep once more, her tiny breaths steady and calm. The seatbelt sign flashed on, and the cabin came to life with the sounds of passengers preparing for landing. Yet despite the bustling around her, Jessica remained in a quiet reverie, her mind still spinning from the events that had unfolded. What had happened to Laura? What consequences would she face? Jessica didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. The world was watching now. What had begun as a single flight attendant's misguided attempt to assert her power had turned into something much bigger. The ripple effects of this moment would be felt long after the plane landed. The passengers who had witnessed the scene weren't silent about it either. As Jessica glanced around, she noticed the subtle glances, some sympathetic, others curious, and still others filled with an unsettling kind of discomfort. People were talking about it, sharing what they had seen, passing judgment. The atmosphere had shifted. Jessica couldn't help but feel the weight of the eyes that lingered on her, the whispers that followed her down the aisle as the plane taxied to the gate. But it wasn't the eyes of strangers that bothered her most. It was the fear, quiet but persistent fear, she'd felt from Laura. The flight attendant had been so certain of herself, so confident in her place in the world. She'd assumed that Jessica, a mother with a young child, didn't belong in first class, that her presence there was somehow an affront. But what Laura hadn't counted on was the truth. Jessica was more than just a mother, more than just a passenger. And now the balance had shifted. As the plane finally came to a halt and the seatbelt signs flickered off, Jessica stood up slowly, careful not to disturb Mia. Her back was straight, her face composed, but inside the storm raged on. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. About every woman, every mother, every person who had ever been judged for their appearance or their place in society. Jessica had fought for so long to build her life, to prove her worth in a world that often dismissed her. And now this flight, this moment, was just another chapter in that story, a chapter that would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. As she made her way down the aisle, she could feel the eyes on her again. Some were filled with admiration, others with disbelief, but none of them were judging her the way Laura had. She was no longer a passive participant in this story. She was the protagonist, and the world was watching her every move. When she reached the jet bridge, she saw the familiar face of the Horizon Airlines ground crew, waiting to help passengers disembark. Jessica's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for Marcus. Her heart skipped a beat as she finally saw him, standing by the gate, his tall figure unmistakable among the crowd. He was talking to a few other passengers, but when their eyes met, his face softened with relief. He had been briefed on the situation by now, of course, but he had to have known the impact it had on her. Without hesitation, he made his way toward her, his eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of someone who had seen this all unfold from a different angle. "Are you okay?" Marcus's voice was low but full of concern, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of distress. Jessica nodded, her heart swelling at the sight of him. "I'm fine. I'm just tired." His gaze flicked down to Mia, who was still sleeping soundly in her arms. Then he placed a hand gently on Jessica's shoulder, a gesture of silent support. He didn't need to say anything more. The weight of the day, the pressure of what had just happened was still there, but Marcus's presence grounded her. "Let's get you two home," he said, offering a comforting smile. Jessica's heart softened, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to relax just a little. It wasn't over yet. There would be phone calls, there would be follow-ups, there would be more to fight for. But for now, she had Marcus. She had Mia. And for the moment, that was enough. They walked together toward the exit, the air inside the terminal buzzing with the activity of passengers rushing to and fro. Jessica's mind was still whirling with the events of the flight, but she knew that the fallout was far from over. Laura's actions would not be forgotten. The question was, what would happen to Laura now that the world knew the truth? As they stepped into the airport terminal, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, and his face hardened slightly as he read the message. Jessica knew this was only the beginning. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the apprehension in her chest. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes calm but resolute. "The company's handling it. Laura's been removed from duty, and we'll deal with the rest. But I want you to know, I'll make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. Not for you, and not for anyone else who's ever been treated like that." Jessica smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "Thank you, Marcus. I didn't do this for myself. I did it for all the people who have to deal with this every day and don't have the same support." Marcus nodded. "You're not just fighting for yourself, Jessica. You're fighting for everyone who's been silenced. And that's what makes you so damn strong." Her heart swelled with gratitude. No one had ever understood her fight the way Marcus did. The rest of the passengers slowly began to exit the plane, some casting curious glances toward Jessica and Marcus, but no one dared to approach them. It was clear now that Jessica wasn't just a woman with a baby who had been slapped by a flight attendant. She was someone who commanded respect, and she would make sure that respect was given. As they made their way to the baggage claim, Jessica's mind drifted to what had just happened, the aftermath that was already beginning to ripple out beyond the cabin. It wasn't just about what had occurred on the plane. It was about the change that was coming, a change that started with one woman standing up for herself, and it was only just beginning. The days following the flight were a whirlwind. The media was buzzing, and the news had spread like wildfire. Horizon Airlines had become the center of attention, not just because of the incident itself, but because of the powerful way it had unfolded. Jessica's name was now attached to a story that resonated with so many people who had experienced similar injustices, and she couldn't deny the weight of it. Marcus had kept her updated throughout the day. He had spoken with the legal team, and everything was being handled with precision. Laura Bennett had been suspended immediately after the incident, and Horizon was conducting a full investigation into her behavior. Jessica knew that the company couldn't afford to let this slide, not with the public eye now focused on every decision they made. But despite the company's efforts to manage the situation, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. It wasn't just the investigation into Laura that kept her up at night. It was the reality that there was something deeper at play, something that this incident had exposed. It wasn't just Laura's actions that had caused this rift. It was the systemic biases that people like her had come to expect as normal. And as much as Jessica knew that the spotlight would eventually shift, she wasn't going to let this moment pass without trying to make a real difference. As the days wore on, Jessica found herself in a constant state of reflection. Every phone call, every email, every meeting seemed to bring new revelations, and she felt the weight of it all. The support from the passengers who had witnessed what happened on the flight had been overwhelming. There were countless messages of support on social media, from both strangers and friends alike. It was clear that Jessica's quiet dignity had left an impression on people. The video of the incident had gone viral, and even though she had never intended for that to happen, she couldn't help but acknowledge the power of it. But then came the backlash. The truth was, for every person who supported her, there was another who found themselves questioning her. The viral nature of the video had sparked a flurry of opinions, many condemning Laura's behavior, but others accusing Jessica of stirring the pot, of taking the situation too far. The divisiveness of the response mirrored what Jessica had seen in her career all along. People who were quick to judge, quick to disbelieve, or quick to shift blame. She had seen it all before. Those who couldn't or wouldn't see beyond their own biases. It was late in the evening when Marcus's voice came through her phone again, a sense of urgency in his tone. "Jessica, we need to talk. I'm about to do something, and I want you to hear it from me first." She sat up straight, her heart skipping a beat. "What's going on?" "Laura's been suspended, but I'm pushing for her to be terminated. This kind of behavior isn't something we can let slide. I don't care how long she's been with the company. What she did was inexcusable, and I want you to know that I'm standing firm on this. Horizon needs to make a statement." Jessica paused, her mind racing. She understood Marcus's desire to make things right, but she also knew the gravity of what he was saying. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about setting a precedent for how people like her would be treated in the future. "I appreciate it, Marcus, but do you think firing her is the answer?" Jessica asked, her voice calm but thoughtful. "We don't know everything about Laura. Maybe there's a way to approach this with more compassion, more understanding." Marcus was silent for a beat before he responded, his voice steady. "Compassion is important, but so is accountability, and she crossed a line that can't be ignored. People need to understand that these kinds of actions have consequences. We can't allow this to be swept under the rug, not when there are so many people watching us." Jessica nodded, her thoughts swirling. She knew Marcus was right, but she couldn't help but wonder if there was more at stake here than just Laura. She had been the one targeted, the one attacked, and yet it felt like she was being forced into the center of a much larger conversation. As much as she hated it, Jessica realized that her own experience was now a catalyst, a platform for something that needed to be said, even if she hadn't planned on being the one to say it. She was no longer just a mother on a flight. She was a symbol of resilience, a symbol of the fight for justice. The next morning, the media frenzy hit a new peak. The story had gone beyond Horizon Airlines, and now it was on every news outlet, in every social media feed, and even trending on TV shows. But there was a shift in how the story was being told. Jessica was no longer simply the victim of an unwarranted attack. She was becoming a figurehead, someone who stood up, who spoke out, and who would not back down in the face of adversity. At the same time, the pressure on Horizon Airlines mounted. Public relations teams were scrambling, trying to control the narrative while also ensuring that the company didn't alienate its customer base. The company's spokesperson issued a statement expressing regret over the incident, but Jessica could see right through the corporate speak. It wasn't enough. But then there was the twist she hadn't expected. As she read through the latest round of media coverage, one particular headline caught her eye. Horizon Airlines CEO makes bold statement. Laura Bennett to be fired after incident with passenger. Jessica froze. She wasn't surprised by the news, but the way it was phrased hit a nerve. Marcus had made his decision, and now the whole world was watching. The moment was both empowering and unsettling. Jessica wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality. She knew that the fight had only just begun. The forces at play were bigger than she had ever imagined. And as she stood there reading the news, she felt a quiet determination stir inside her. This wasn't just about what had happened on that plane anymore. It was about something far more profound, something that would require every ounce of strength she had to face. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and media appearances. Jessica's world, which had once been dominated by the corporate realm of technology and business deals, was now consumed by the whirlwind of public attention. Her every move, every word was being scrutinized, not just by the press, but by everyone who had witnessed the incident on that flight. Laura Bennett, still suspended, had become the face of controversy. The public was divided. Some applauded Horizon Airlines for taking swift action, while others criticized the company for failing to act sooner. Social media was flooded with commentary, hashtags calling for justice trending alongside those defending Laura. There was no middle ground, only an escalating storm of opinions, many of which were rooted in prejudice, others in genuine concern for what was right. Jessica had become a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. The media's portrayal of her as a brave mother and fighter for justice was in many ways empowering, but it also felt disorienting. She hadn't set out to be a spokesperson for anything. She simply wanted to be a mother, a wife, and a successful businesswoman, navigating her life with dignity. But this situation had thrust her into the spotlight in a way that was impossible to ignore. She spent long hours speaking with the company's PR team, helping craft statements, attending briefings, and preparing for the inevitable fallout that would continue to ripple out. Every conversation seemed to lead to the same question: what happens next? One afternoon, as Jessica sat in her office, reviewing the latest press release, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Marcus. "We need to talk, in person. I think you are going to want to hear this." Her heart skipped a beat. There had been discussions about the future, about how Horizon Airlines would handle the aftermath of the incident. But this felt different. She quickly texted back, agreeing to meet him in the office. When Marcus arrived, he looked unusually tense, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. He closed the door behind him as he stepped into her office and sat down across from her. "You look like you've been through a whirlwind," he said, his voice strained, but with an underlying sense of determination. Jessica gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think we both have." Marcus leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. "The board is going to make an official statement later today," he began, "and I know you've been involved in every decision, but I wanted to tell you first." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "What's the statement?" "We're moving forward with Laura's termination," Marcus said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But here's the thing, it's not just about her anymore. The company's image is at stake. We can't afford to let the situation fester. There's more pressure coming from outside the company, from the media, the public, and even other employees." Jessica absorbed his words, nodding slowly. "I get that, but I don't want this to be just about damage control. It's about doing what's right." Marcus exhaled sharply. "I agree. That's why we're going to take a stand. I'm going to make a bigger move." Jessica's heart raced, sensing the gravity of what he was about to say. "I'm stepping down as CEO," Marcus said, his words hanging in the air. "Effective immediately." Jessica's eyes widened in shock. "What? Marcus, no. You can't." "I can and I will," he replied, his voice unwavering. "This situation, the way it has unfolded, has shown me that the company needs to change from the inside out. You've been doing the hard work behind the scenes, and it's time for you to take the reins. Horizon Airlines needs a leader who is not just part of the system, but someone who will change it. And that person is you." Jessica sat back in her chair, stunned by the magnitude of what he was saying. She had never imagined this. Sure, she had been the silent partner in their marriage, supporting him from behind the scenes, but to step into his shoes as CEO, that was an entirely different matter. I, I don't know what to say, she admitted, feeling a lump in her throat. You don't need to say anything yet, Marcus said gently, but I'm telling you now, because you deserve to know. This is your moment, Jessica. You've been fighting for what's right, not just for you, but for every person who's ever been silenced or overlooked. You've built your career on those principles, and now it's time for you to lead with them. The weight of his words settled in, and Jessica found herself at a crossroads. She had spent years building her career, fighting against the system, proving her worth. But had she ever truly considered what it would mean to take charge of a company like Horizon Airlines? This company, it's not just about profits, Jessica said slowly, her mind racing. It's about how we treat people. How do we empower them? If I take this position, I need to ensure that everyone at Horizon knows they are valued. Everyone. No more blind spots, no more unchecked power. Marcus smiled, a rare look of pride on his face. Exactly. That's why I'm handing it over to you. You've already done more than most people could dream of. The room fell into silence as Jessica processed the weight of Marcus's decision. There was so much at stake, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her. Determination, strength, the same resolve she had felt when she'd first started her journey. She wasn't just going to let this moment pass her by. I'm in, she said, her voice steady and clear. I'll do it, but we need to make sure that the changes are real, not just for show. We start with Horizon's culture. We make it about integrity, respect, and fairness. And we don't stop until it's part of everything we do. Marcus nodded, a sense of relief in his eyes. I knew you would. Let's do this together. As the meeting ended, Jessica felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She wasn't just stepping into her new role as CEO. She was stepping into a new era for Horizon Airlines, one that she would shape with every decision she made. The company was about to undergo a transformation, and she was going to be at the helm. But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The challenges would be significant, but the fight she had started against prejudice, against discrimination, was just beginning. And now she had the power to make sure it didn't stop. The weeks that followed Marcus's resignation were a whirlwind of changes. Horizon Airlines, now under Jessica's leadership, was facing a complete transformation, one that would require every ounce of her strength, strategic thinking, and resolve. The press had already caught wind of her promotion, and the news outlets were abuzz with mixed reactions. Some hailed it as a bold, progressive move, while others questioned whether a woman like Jessica, with her focus on justice, could lead a massive corporation like Horizon. But Jessica wasn't concerned with the headlines. She was focused on what needed to be done. The company's culture had to be rebuilt from the ground up, starting with the people who worked there and extending to every passenger who boarded their flights. Her first few days as CEO were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and press conferences. There was little time for self-reflection. She was too busy strategizing, making decisions that would influence the company's future. It didn't take long for Jessica to realize that her leadership would be tested on multiple fronts. There were those who supported her vision, but there were just as many who were skeptical. Not everyone was thrilled about the changes she was implementing. As soon as the word spread about the company's new direction, one rooted in fairness, transparency, and inclusivity, there were whispers in the halls, quiet resistance from longtime employees who didn't believe in the direction she was taking. Jessica didn't back down. She knew that in order to create real change, she needed to set a clear example. She was determined to create a company where no one, regardless of their position, was above the law of respect, and where every employee had a voice. But this, she knew, would take time. The deeply ingrained biases and systems would not disappear overnight. It wasn't until her second week as CEO that Jessica felt the true weight of her role. She was called into a high-stakes meeting with the company's board of directors. It was time to address the fallout from Laura's actions and make it clear that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated at Horizon. The boardroom was cold, stark white walls and glass tables, reflecting the sterile, impersonal environment. As Jessica entered, all eyes were on her. There was no applause, no warm greeting, only the hard stares of the men and women who had been running the company for years. Jessica knew the odds were stacked against her. She was a newcomer in a male-dominated space, and though she had earned her position, there were still those who doubted her. "Jessica," began Harold Grayson, the lead board member, his voice dripping with formality, "we appreciate your enthusiasm for change, but we need to discuss the recent events and how they impact our brand. What happened with Laura is an unfortunate incident, but we need to consider the bigger picture. Horizon has built a reputation, and we can't afford to lose that." Jessica could feel her pulse quicken, but she remained calm, her voice unwavering as she addressed the board. "Let me make something clear," she began, her gaze steady and piercing. "This company's reputation isn't just built on profits or flight numbers. It's built on trust, the trust of our employees, our passengers, and our partners. And trust, once broken, is hard to repair. I understand the importance of the brand, but we can't move forward by sweeping things under the rug. This isn't just about the incident with Laura, it's about the culture we're fostering here. And it's time we start holding ourselves accountable." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, but Jessica could see that her words were starting to have an effect. She wasn't here to play the game. She was here to change it. "I've spent years in this industry, and I've seen what happens when companies ignore issues like this. They erode from the inside out," she continued. "I'm not here to make empty promises. I'm here to make real change. I want Horizon to be a company that people believe in, not just for the luxury of flying, but because they know we stand for something. We're going to start by implementing a new set of ethics and diversity policies. We're going to hold ourselves accountable and rebuild the trust that's been lost. And that starts with me." There was a tense silence in the room, but Jessica held her ground, her eyes moving from one board member to the next. She wasn't going to back down, not this time. After what felt like an eternity, Harold finally spoke. "We understand your commitment to integrity, Jessica," he said, his tone less dismissive, though still tinged with skepticism. "But this won't be easy. The changes you're talking about will require a complete shift in the way we operate. It's not just about the policies we put in place. It's about changing the mindset of every employee, every customer. Can you pull this off?" Jessica took a deep breath, her thoughts racing as she glanced at the faces around the table. She had heard this before, the doubts, the hesitation. She knew that change was never easy, especially in a company as large as Horizon. But she had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back now. "I'm not just going to pull it off," she said, her voice firm and confident. "We're going to do it, together. This company belongs to every person who works here, and we're going to create an environment where they can thrive. If we do this right, Horizon will become a leader in not just aviation, but in corporate responsibility. It's not just about what we do, it's about who we are." The board members shifted in their seats, some still uncertain, but others seemed to be absorbing her words. Harold nodded slowly, then glanced around the room. "All right, Jessica, we'll support you, but you're going to have to prove it." Jessica's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She was ready. "I will, and I'll make sure everyone knows what Horizon stands for. We'll make this work." With that, the meeting ended. As Jessica walked out of the boardroom, she felt a surge of determination. The first hurdle had been crossed, but there would be more to come. There were battles ahead, battles she knew she would have to fight to ensure that her vision for Horizon became a reality. But Jessica was ready for them. She wasn't going to back down, not now, not ever. And as she stepped into her office, closing the door behind her, she knew that this wasn't just about corporate change. It was about creating a legacy where fairness, respect, and integrity weren't just buzzwords. They were the foundation of everything Horizon would stand for. Weeks turned into months, and Jessica's transformation of Horizon Airlines continued to gain momentum. The company's internal culture was slowly shifting. There were new policies in place, new training programs, and a renewed focus on inclusivity and respect for all employees, regardless of their position. But even as she pushed forward with these changes, the external pressure only increased. The media had never stopped buzzing about the incident with Laura and Jessica's rise to power. It seemed like the world was watching every move she made. One of the biggest tests of her leadership came unexpectedly when a new crisis arose, one that threatened to undo much of the progress she had fought for. It started with a whistleblower. An employee disgruntled with the rapid changes within Horizon began leaking confidential information about the company's financials to the press. The leaks were damning, suggesting that the company had been involved in questionable financial practices in the past, practices that were supposedly being swept under the rug with the new leadership. Jessica's phone rang early one morning, her heart sinking as she saw the name on the screen. Evelyn, her lawyer. Evelyn was always the voice of calm, the one who had seen it all. But today, her voice on the other end was tense, strained. "Jessica," Evelyn began, "we've got a problem. The leaks are getting bigger. They've got everything, from tax evasion claims to questionable deals with contractors. The press is about to run with it, and they're coming for you." Jessica leaned against her desk, rubbing her temples. The pressure was mounting, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her from all sides. She had worked so hard to create a company that reflected her values, but now it seemed like those same values were being questioned by the very people who had once supported her. "How bad is it?" Jessica asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "It's bad," Evelyn replied. "The leaks are explosive, and they're tying everything back to the board's previous leadership. The press is calling it a smokescreen for your reforms. They're saying you're covering up old issues to create a facade of change." Jessica felt a wave of frustration sweep over her. It was exactly what she had feared. The changes she had worked so hard for were being overshadowed by the sins of the past. It wasn't just about what had happened on the plane anymore. It was about the larger battle for Horizon's future. "I need to address this," Jessica said, her mind already turning toward a solution. "I need to take control of the narrative before it spirals out of control. We can't let this turn into another media frenzy." Evelyn was silent for a moment before responding. "I agree, but be careful. If the leaks are as damaging as they seem, you're going to be facing some heavy scrutiny, and there's a chance you'll be dragged into a public trial." A trial. The word hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. She had fought so hard to be seen as a leader who was willing to stand up for what was right. And now her past, Horizon's past, was coming back to haunt her. "I'll handle it," she said finally, her voice firm. "We'll face this head on. I won't let them use this as a way to tear everything down." In the coming days, Jessica spent countless hours working with her team and her legal counsel, crafting a statement that would address the leaks while still maintaining the integrity of her mission at Horizon. It was clear that she wasn't just facing a corporate scandal, she was facing a full-scale public trial of her leadership. The media had already begun its smear campaign, and the pressure was building. On the day of the press conference, the tension was palpable. Jessica stood at the podium, facing a sea of reporters, their cameras flashing like a barrage of gunfire. She could feel the weight of their questions before they were even asked, the judgment hanging in the air. The room fell silent as she took the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she knew this moment would define her, define Horizon's future. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice strong and steady, "I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Horizon Airlines, but as a leader who is committed to accountability, transparency, and most importantly, justice." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "As you all know, recent leaks have surfaced regarding our company's financial practices. These allegations are serious, and I want to address them directly. I will not stand here and pretend that Horizon's past is without fault, but I will also not allow these mistakes to define the company we are today and the company we will be in the future. We are taking immediate action to investigate these claims, and anyone involved in unethical practices will be held accountable." There was a murmur of surprise in the room. Jessica could see the reporters scribbling notes, their attention peaked. She pressed on, her voice unwavering. "We are also rolling out new measures to ensure that this never happens again. We are committed to being an industry leader, not just in aviation, but in corporate ethics. This is a turning point for us. Horizon Airlines will not be defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the work we do moving forward." Jessica's words hung in the air, and for a brief moment there was silence. Then the questions began, rapid fire and pointed, but Jessica handled them with grace and poise, sticking to her message of accountability and reform. She knew there would be more questions, more scrutiny, but this was the moment she had been preparing for. As the press conference ended and the reporters began to file out of the room, Jessica stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The trial that had been looming over her now felt inevitable, but she wasn't afraid. For too long, the system had allowed people like Laura Bennett to rise without consequences. For too long, the company had been run by those who valued profits over people. But Jessica wasn't just fighting to protect Horizon's reputation. She was fighting to build something new, something that could change the industry for good. As she walked back to her office, she knew the real battle was just beginning. There were people out there who would never accept the changes she was making, but she was ready for them. She had faced worse, and she had come out stronger. And now, Horizon Airlines was going to do the same. The days following Jessica's press conference were a mixture of tension and anticipation. While the public had responded positively to her statements, it was clear that the real test of her leadership had only just begun. The leaks, though addressed publicly, were still very much alive in the media. But now, instead of reacting to the constant barrage of criticism, Jessica had begun to take proactive steps to not only address the situation, but to rebuild the company's foundation on a stronger, more ethical framework. Inside Horizon Airlines, the culture was beginning to shift, but the resistance from some employees was palpable. There were whispers, the familiar clinking of old guard power dynamics, and doubts about whether the new direction could survive long-term. Jessica had known from the start that change wasn't easy, but she had underestimated the sheer scale of the challenge. One afternoon, as Jessica sat in her office going over the financials and the latest round of media coverage, there was a knock at the door. She looked up to find Evelyn standing in the doorway, her usual composed demeanor slightly strained. "Jessica, we need to talk," Evelyn said, her voice low and serious. Jessica gestured for her to come in. "What's going on?" Evelyn closed the door behind her and sat down across from Jessica. "It's about the leaks. I've been digging into it, and it's worse than we thought. The whistleblower isn't just an employee. This goes deeper. There's someone on the inside working to take you down." Jessica's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who?" Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes scanning Jessica's face. "We're not sure yet, but I've got some intel that points to someone on the board, maybe even someone close to the top. The leaks are coming from the inside, and it's not just about financials anymore. It's about the shift in power, Jessica. Someone doesn't want things to change." Jessica sat back, her mind racing. This was exactly what she had feared. She had been so focused on external pressures, on the media and the public, that she had failed to see how deep the resistance could go. There were powerful people within Horizon who didn't want her vision for the future to succeed, and they were using every resource at their disposal to undermine her. "We need to find out who's behind this," Jessica said, her voice steady but fierce. "We can't let them sabotage everything we've worked for." Evelyn nodded. "I'm already working on it. But we need to be careful. This person or people are playing a dangerous game. We need to be one step ahead." For the next few days, Jessica and Evelyn worked quietly behind the scenes, gathering information, trying to identify the person or people responsible for the leaks. It wasn't easy. Every lead seemed to point in different directions, and Jessica knew that trust was now in short supply within her own company. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. Too much was on the line. One evening, as Jessica was leaving the office, she received a call from Marcus. His voice, usually calm and collected, sounded urgent. "Jessica, we need to talk. Meet me at the penthouse." Her heart skipped a beat. The penthouse was their private space, the one place where they could talk without the prying eyes of the press or the board. Jessica agreed to meet him, her mind already racing. When she arrived, Marcus was pacing the floor, his brow furrowed with concern. "I've been talking to some of the senior executives," he said without preamble, "and I've got a lead on who might be behind the leaks." Jessica sat down, her pulse picking up again. "Who?" Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face her. "It's Samuel Grayson, Harold's son." Jessica felt a chill run through her. Samuel Grayson. She had known about him, of course. He was a longtime member of the board, a significant shareholder in Horizon, and someone whose influence had always been unquestioned. He was also known for being a staunch defender of the old way of doing things, exactly the kind of person who would resist her vision for a more inclusive, transparent company. What's he got to do with this? Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her mind was spinning. He's been undermining you from the beginning. He doesn't want any of the changes you're implementing. He sees it as a threat to his power, to the control that his family has over this company. The leaks are his way of trying to destabilize you, create doubt, create chaos, Marcus explained. Jessica's mind raced. This wasn't just a simple internal dispute, it was a power play. Samuel wasn't just trying to take down her leadership, he was trying to take down everything she had worked for. Do you have proof? She asked, her voice hardening. Not yet, Marcus said, but I'm working on it. I've got a team looking into his communications, his interactions with the press, and his financial dealings. We'll find something. Jessica's hands clenched into fists. The thought that someone from within the company, someone who should have been her ally, was working against her made her blood boil. But she wasn't going to let him win. She couldn't afford to. We can't wait for proof, Jessica said, her voice sharp. We need to act now. If he's behind this, we need to expose him. We need to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. Marcus nodded, his face set in determination. I agree. I'll do whatever it takes. We can't let him destroy everything we've built. Over the next few days, Jessica and Marcus worked in tandem, putting together a plan to root out the corruption within Horizon Airlines. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they had no choice. The leaks were more than just a threat to their reputation. They were a direct challenge to their vision of a better, more ethical company. As Jessica sat in her office that evening, preparing for the next steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. The forces against her were strong, but she had one thing they didn't: resolve. She had fought her whole life for this moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were some of the most intense and challenging of Jessica's life. Every move she made felt like it was under a magnifying glass, and every decision was a high-stakes gamble. The leaks, the corporate sabotage, and the resistance from within her own company all pointed to one undeniable truth. Horizon Airlines was at a crossroads, and Jessica had to either take control or risk losing everything she had worked for. Samuel Grayson, despite the mounting evidence against him, was proving to be a formidable opponent. He used every trick in the book, manipulating the board, leaking false information to the press, and attempting to create chaos within the company. But Jessica had learned quickly that she could not just play defense. She had to go on the offensive. With Marcus's help, they uncovered damning evidence of Samuel's involvement in the leaks and his attempts to destabilize the company. They had enough to expose him, but it wasn't enough to simply reveal the truth. Jessica knew she had to outsmart him in a way that would leave no room for doubt about her leadership. She couldn't afford to let Samuel's lies fester and grow. One evening, just as the sun began to set over Los Angeles, Jessica sat in her office, looking over the final pieces of her plan. The evidence was in place, the strategy set. But there was one final step to complete: the confrontation. She had already spoken to the board, and they were aligned with her, but the public still needed to hear the truth, and she needed to make sure that Samuel could never undermine her leadership again. It was a delicate balancing act. She had to expose the corruption while also showing the world that Horizon Airlines was still a company of integrity, capable of recovering from its past mistakes. The public trust was fragile, and Jessica couldn't afford to make any missteps. That night, at a highly anticipated press conference, Jessica stood in front of a room filled with reporters, cameras flashing as they awaited her words. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew that something big was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. "Good evening," Jessica began, her voice calm yet commanding. "I'm here tonight to address the recent events surrounding Horizon Airlines, including the leaks that have made headlines and the steps we're taking to ensure transparency, accountability, and a brighter future for this company." She paused, letting her words sink in. The reporters leaned forward, eager for what was to come next. For months, Horizon has been the subject of false accusations, leaks, and manipulation. What started as an unfortunate incident with one of our employees escalated into a battle for control, one that was orchestrated by a member of this company's board. Samuel Grayson, who has long held influence over Horizon Airlines, has been working behind the scenes to destabilize our progress and undermine our commitment to change. A murmur spread through the room as Jessica continued. She was met with skeptical looks, some reporters unsure if they were hearing the truth or another corporate defense. But Jessica had prepared for this moment. She was going to show them the evidence they couldn't ignore. Samuel Grayson used his position to leak confidential information, manipulating the media and causing unnecessary fear and division within our company, she said, her voice steady but full of conviction. We have concrete evidence that connects him to the leaks and to several attempts to create chaos within the company. I won't stand here and allow someone like him to destroy everything we've worked for. She clicked a button on the screen behind her, and a series of emails, phone records, and financial transactions appeared on the large display. The evidence was undeniable. Samuel's involvement in the leaks, his communications with external media outlets, and his attempts to discredit Jessica were all laid out for everyone to see. The room was silent. The reporters were no longer skeptical. They were riveted. This is the truth, Jessica continued. Horizon Airlines is not the company Samuel Grayson wants it to be, but it will be the company that I know it can be, a company that values integrity, respect, and fairness above all else. With that, Jessica's team released a statement and the full details of the investigation. The information spread like wildfire, and within hours, social media was ablaze with reactions. People were outraged by the lengths Samuel had gone to sabotage the company, but they were also impressed by Jessica's ability to take charge and expose the corruption. As the news broke, the board quickly moved to suspend Samuel Grayson, and the company officially severed ties with him. Horizon Airlines issued a public apology to its employees and customers, vowing to rebuild the trust that had been shaken by the scandal. The fallout from the leaks was far from over, but Jessica had taken the first step in re-establishing Horizon's reputation. But the victory didn't come without its costs. While Jessica had exposed Samuel's betrayal, the public wasn't ready to forgive Horizon completely. The leaks had tainted the company's image, and it would take time to regain the trust of both employees and passengers. But Jessica was undeterred. This was only a battle in a much larger war, a war to redefine Horizon Airlines and to ensure that no one would ever again have to face the kind of discrimination and exploitation she had once endured. In the weeks that followed, Horizon's employees rallied behind Jessica. They had seen her fight for what was right, and now they were ready to follow her lead. Together, they worked to rebuild the company's internal culture, focusing on ethics, transparency, and diversity at every level. Jessica wasn't just trying to restore Horizon to its former glory. She was transforming it into something stronger, something more meaningful. As she walked through the company headquarters one afternoon, Jessica felt the weight of everything she had accomplished. The road had been long, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but she had made it through. Horizon Airlines was on the path to becoming something new, something she was proud of. And as she looked ahead, she knew there were still challenges to face. There would always be those who would resist change, who would fight to maintain the status quo. But Jessica was ready for them. She had faced down her biggest challenge and emerged stronger. Now she was ready to lead Horizon Airlines into a new era, one built on respect, integrity, and a relentless drive to do what was right. This was just the beginning. The journey of Jessica's leadership at Horizon Airlines is more than just a tale of corporate triumph. It is a testament to the power of resilience, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to doing what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Throughout this story, Jessica faced challenges that tested her from every angle: discrimination, corporate sabotage, media scrutiny, and internal resistance. Yet through it all, she never compromised on her values. Her strength wasn't in fighting back with force. It was in her steadfast commitment to fairness, her ability to stay true to herself, and her resolve to build a company culture that valued respect, transparency, and inclusivity. At its core, this story reminds us that change is never easy. Real transformation requires confronting uncomfortable truths, facing powerful adversaries, and making difficult decisions. But it also teaches us that leadership is about more than just authority. It's about inspiring others to believe in a vision, to rally behind a cause that's bigger than any individual or company. Jessica's story also underscores the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Whether it's corporate corruption, prejudice, or personal betrayal, resilience is what ultimately defines the successful. It's about refusing to be silenced, refusing to let injustice prevail, and believing that one person can make a difference. In the end, Jessica's journey isn't just about saving a company, it's about changing the system for the better, about ensuring that those who follow in her footsteps inherit a company in a world where respect, equality, and fairness are the standard, not the exception. This is a call to action for all of us. No matter where we are or what we do, we all have the power to stand up, speak out, and make a lasting impact. It might not always be easy, but it's always worth it. Let Jessica's story inspire you to challenge the status quo, to lead with integrity, and to never back down in the pursuit of justice. Together, we can create a world where every person, regardless of their background, their race, or their station in life, has the opportunity to thrive and be respected.